we are proposing to handle this differently. I'm going to ask that we hold our questions for Vili for a moment, and then we'll listen to Mel, and then after Mel, we'll ask questions to both of them. Correct? Can we do it that way? Yeah. 2 BGMs away, we hosted the Palestinian Christian leaders from the Bethlehem Bible College, and they make presentations like this. And out of that BGM, we took a resolution that as Teasa, we will actively work on the justice and peace in Palestine. And personally, last year I took my own pilgrimage without a group. I went alone to Bethlehem in the middle of the war. And I had my own experience. I don't have time to explain that. But upon coming back, coincidentally, there was a how do you call it, a round table of coalition partners organized by Nelson Mandela Foundation. And Trevor and I and Bramos were invited to be part of that roundtable discussion. And through that initiative, I came to know Mel and a number of her colleagues who are Jewish friends for Palestine. And it was very fascinating to hear from their own perspective as Jews and what they are trying to do to bring about peace in the Middle East. And it was fascinating to learn, maybe for some of us, that the issue in Palestine is not a religious issue. It's not the Jews fighting Muslims, but it's an issue of Zionism. And Mel and I were tasked to do something about debunking the biblical myths around the land and the issue of chosenness and so on. So we've asked Mel to come and talk to us, and she will also touch the issue of land as well from the Palestinian and issue. So I'm going to ask her to come forward. I think she's also going to, I hope we have helped her with the presentation on the slides. Is it going to be reflected? Because she came with a stick. Yeah. Is it okay? Thanks. Thanks, Mel. You can come forward, my sister. Let's share up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Actually, could I control the presentation from here? Because I would like to also be responsive to Mr. Nell's really fascinating presentation. I think there was a great deal of wisdom in that presentation, and I would like to make the connection with the situation in Israel-Palestine, so that we've got some continuity from what you've been saying. So if I may have the computer here with the presentation up, that would be very helpful. But while the folks are organizing that, to bring the computer so I can do that, while they're organizing that, I'd like to say something about olive trees and Palestine and Israel. When we were small children, we were brought up in a very, in a Zionistic families and so on. And we had little blue boxes. And the little blue boxes were for us as children to put our pocket money in those boxes. And what were those boxes for? Our parents told us those boxes are to green the desert in Israel. We said, great, that sounds like a very valuable thing to do. So we put our money in those boxes. Much, much later, decades later, we learned that our money went towards making a forest. And the forest was pine trees. But the forest was covering another ecology, just like Mr. Willie explained. That original ecology had olive trees and produced an olive tree, you may know, is something that works over many, many, many hundreds and thousands of years. It doesn't just suddenly produce olives. That forest, and we went to visit that forest as a grouping of Jewish people. It's called Lubia. And we found there that not only were the olive trees, there were some little few olive trees left, but hardly anything. We found that those olive trees had been destroyed and that pine trees had been planted, European pine trees, you know, with the ecology, the biome that you talk about of Northern Europe, had been planted in place of the natural ecology. But we also found that not only were there olive trees that were covered, but also there'd been a village there. And that village is where the inhabitants of the original area had been living for many centuries. So the original village of Lubia, there were just little stones and places that this was the graveyard, this was the mosque, this was the school, this was, you know, ruins that were there. So something happened to change that space, which had respect for the local ecology and encouraged the local ecology of olive trees and natural things that grow in that environment. From that to a completely different situation where just about, but not every, sign of the previous village, the previous situation had been covered and had been ruined. And how did we get to that place? How did we go from a place where people worked the land in a respectful way, in a way that held water, in a way that respected the natural things that grow in that ecology, from there to stripping that and becoming something else? How did we get from A to B? And that's what I'm going to be talking about in my presentation. May I have the computer, please, so I can... Yeah. I'd like to work the computer from here. Is that possible? Oh, almost ready. Thank you. I'd also like to just comment on Mr. Willie's input and saying, you know, this coming up generation, I can say because my son is part of that generation, who would agree and embrace so much of what you said about the need for a sustainable land, not one that is not driven by greed. And how do we get there? And that generation, I believe, is coming up. We're the older generation, right? They're our kids and our grandkids. But that generation is saying, something has to change here. There has to be a big shift. And in your space, you have found the biblical references which encourage us to go in that direction. And there's so much wisdom there. But I think don't be too despondent, because I think this younger generation is starting to do this, and even in the context of our lands in South Africa. I know because I work as a community in community development, and there are a lot of initiatives which are saying we need to go back to a lot of the wisdom that is inherent in dealing with the land and having respect for our land space. And in South Africa, this is happening now. There are many organizations that are based all over the country. Limpopo, sorry, but not in urban areas, in rural areas, that are re-looking at this. So we can be, I think, encouraged by that, and the use of the wisdom that is grounded in people's communities. So, may I... this is my colleague Merlin Edelstein. We're from the same organization, SAJP. And you wanted to add a little bit about this?
Yes.
While we're getting ready, please.
Hi. I wanted also to go back to your talk about the original versus what's not original, and to the talk about olive trees. And what we're often not told about is what happened in 1948 in Palestine with the founding of Israel. Israel wasn't founded as a completely noble pursuit. In fact, to replace the original people who were living there, many had to be driven out. About 750,000 people were forced from their homes. About 500 villages or more were completely destroyed. And without understanding this origin story of the conflict, it's very difficult to understand what's going on now, where the conflict is coming from. It didn't really originate on the 7th of October, as we'll all go back to what's often portrayed in the media as a war starting then. In fact, the conflict started a lot earlier. People in Gaza have been restrained there and really confined in there like a very large ghetto for a long time, because many of them are the refugees who were driven out in 1948. So we need to understand the origins really of that story, because nothing else makes sense without that context. And in terms of why we don't know that 750,000 people were driven out, why there was this great ethnic cleansing, it has to do with political propaganda. It has to be with what facts are highlighted and what's brought into shadow and what's hidden. So many things are hidden, like this great ethnic cleansing that happened, while other things, that the fact that Jews lived there maybe 2,000 years ago, and there has been a continual Jewish presence in the area, we're often told that, but then we're not told about the huge amount of ethnic cleansing that came about. And this hiding of things, this hiding of the origin of things, and the hiding of the truth is very much a political propaganda project. And so we see a journalist, Hassan Shabat, was actually killed a few days ago. Just the latest. There's been over 200 media people killed in Gaza. Okay, these are the authentic Palestinian people who are trying to tell us what's happening there and to communicate with the truth with us. But there's an ongoing attempt at assassinating them. And I think we all need to protect our eyes and our own ears, which are coming out of Gaza, and speak up about this, about the message, the origin, the reality being suppressed and controlled by a political project instead of what's really happening there. Thank you very much. I'll give you back to Merle now.
Thanks. Thank you, Merlin. Okay, so I want to come back to the theme that the previous speaker has spoken about, and I've asked our people at the media, at the technical desk there, to go to a particular slide. Could you, is that okay? Sorry? It's not available. It's not on YouTube. I'm sorry, I did test it and it is on YouTube. If you go to slide presentation mode, you have to go to the actual presentation mode and go to that slide and then just click it. It's a link. Okay, so this is very difficult. Do you want to have 10 minutes tea?
Yeah, sorry. Colleagues, I think there's been a little bit challenging with the technology. Can we take a 10 minutes break, tea? Then we come back at 22. Thank you.
between the computer and the projector. It's been problems uphill. So I empathize with you very much. Technology can do strange things. I would like to start off, as I say, making a link with what Willie was talking about. Okay, the land and the need to protect the land. And I'd like to just show a 1-minute video of what has happened in part of the Holy Land to the land itself. Yeah, there's not many words that one can say after seeing something like that. It is, I don't even want to talk to it because I find it's deeply, deeply unsettling. Yeah, I find it deeply unsettling. Could somebody from tech help me to find the beginning of the presentation? What I want to talk about is how did we get to that? Because what you've just seen has resulted in that land, which is in Gaza, and the whole of Gaza looks like that, not being able to be used for any production for hundreds of years, because those pictures that you've just seen are the result of 1,000-pound bombs that have been carpet bombed the entire area. So how did the children of Israel get to that point? How did that happen? And that's what I'm going to be talking about. The first thing that I'd like to address is this: what is Israel, or who is Israel? And go back to the biblical origins of that. Where does the name come from, and why, and how did it come about? So the origin, which is described in Genesis 32, chapters 22 to 32, reflect when Jacob, right, was waiting. He was waiting to go back to his family, and there'd been a big family fight, and he was waiting very anxiously. And during the night, he found himself wrestling with a figure, with a kind of figure of a man, a figure of somebody. And Jacob would not let go of this figure until he was blessed. And he wrestled the whole night. Now that place where that happened, it's known, the place is known, is now called Peniel. Pan is a face in Hebrew. El is God. So the place where I saw the face of God, but my life was spared. So he understood that this was a divine transformation, a divine process that was happening to him. And as a result, he was called from then on, one of his names was Israel, he who wrestles with God. So that is the origin of the word Israel, the name Israel. It's a person. And his children, as Willie was so elaborated on, the 12 children who became the 12 tribes, are referred to as B'nai Yisrael. Yisrael was a person, a blessed person, and not a state. Often, though, I mean, in our biblical references, certainly in our liturgic references, I'm a practicing Jew, I go to synagogue, and very often in our liturgy, there's reference to Israel. But that's not a reference to a place. It's a reference to the people of Israel and what we have been commanded by God to carry out. So that's the first very important thing. And even Jesus, and you'll know so much more about this than me, addresses the people, the community, the house of Israel, and he refers to the descendants of Jacob. So that's very important. Now, somehow, there's been a leap from the people of Israel to the name of the nation being called Israel. And that happened in a very particular context. That context was very, very strongly influenced by what happened in the Second World War. Right. So the context in which Israel, the state, came about was after the Second World War and the horrific targeting of Jewish people, amongst others, for firstly leaving Germany, that was the early days, to afterwards actually let's eliminate. That happened about mid-war, 1941-42, when Germany had started to, it wasn't doing so well in the war against the Soviet Union, and they said, look, we have to deliver something. Let's actually, instead of just getting rid of them, getting them to leave, let's get them to be no longer. So that was the Holocaust. And of course, there was ethnic cleansing and getting rid of many other people. Jews were not the only targets. Of course, there were Christians, and there were very brave Christians who fought until the end. And there were people from a Roma origin. There were people from disabilities who had disabilities who were not pure enough. And there were massacres of different ethnic groupings, like people from Poland were shot en masse and people from Ukraine were shot en masse, both and starved, by the way. That was a big technique they used, and starved by both Hitler and Stalin. It was part of that Second World War. But the problem was, when the Second World War ended, where were the Jews going to go? Now, interestingly, many countries, I mean, they could no longer be in Europe mainland because of the anti-Semitism was very strong. But also, many, many, many countries had shut their borders to Jews trying to escape. So the politics of the time are complicated, but basically Britain, who had shut their doors, let's get rid of this Jewish problem. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in the UK. That was a given. Let's get rid of this problem. We've got a mandate over the Palestine. Let's sort out part of Palestine. So that's the context in which this started happening. Of course, the local inhabitants, by the way, which included people of all faiths, right? There were Jewish people who'd lived there forever, Christian people who'd lived there forever, and Muslim people who'd lived there forever, and atheists. It was a very mixed space. And they were in this space, and they were not consulted, the inhabitants. Now, there are two quotations. The one is what was said at the time. We are going to Palestine. And that is a land without people, for a people without land. That was widespread. That was widely spread. I mean, it is absolutely not true. There were many, many people. There were hundreds of thousands and millions of people already living there. In fact, at the beginning of the century, when the kind of nationalism was very popular, or became popular in Europe, all over the world, and Zionism came up as part of that nationalism that was globally happening, a trend. People went to explore the land of Palestine, and they came back and said, the bride is beautiful, but she's taken. So we've got these two contradictory things that were said about Palestine. There are people there. Those people were not consulted. But that happened all over the world, didn't it? When the English and the Dutch came into South Africa and moved through the country, and when resources were discovered, nobody consulted and sat down with the local people and say, listen, you know, we really want your labor, by the way, and we need you to be working under the ground and doing things. Nobody consulted, so it was the way things were done. We after the Second World War, with all the codes we've got, we're trying to do things differently. Or there are many people in this world who want to do things differently, but they weren't consulted. And this has resulted in, I think, partly what Merlin was talking about. Please help. No, I'm trying to go to the next slide. Whoop. Sorry, folks. There you go. Okay. So what the local people talk about, and that relates to the experience that I spoke a little bit about Libya and what happened in Libya, where people actually were forced to leave their village. They were surrounded by soldiers, and they left, and many of them, in many, many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of villages, escaped the 1948 war, and they left as refugees. Over 700,000 left as refugees. Many left, and they went to the area that we now know as Gaza, and they went also to the area that we now know as the West Bank. Some remained in what is now Israel, and those are the 20% of people from an origin, a non-Jewish origin, Palestinian origin, who are living in villages such as Nazareth and so on, Jaffa, and those kinds of places that are sort of enclaves, if you want, of Palestinian people and Muslim people and Christian people. So there's a lot of evidence, historical evidence, that Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, supported the transfer. They saw the writing on the wall, and I'll talk about that just now. And there were various statements from Ben-Gurion, various writings indicated that he supported the transfer of the population, which is basically ethnic cleansing. Go away from here. It's ours. There was a thing called Plan Dalit, Plan D, where the 48 expulsions refer directly to forced removal, and Israel, once the new government was established, the state of Israel said, nobody shall return, and that's in fact what has happened. So people had fled into Lebanon, into Jordan, into Syria, and they went into camps, but nobody was allowed back, and nobody was allowed to reclaim their houses if they've been, that's called the Absentee Landlord Act. You left. This is ours now. Okay. So that's the kind of context in which we're having a major dilemma now. That dilemma is as follows. Oops. Not letting me go so easily. There you go. Oh. You have to hit the middle of the thing. Okay. So, and people realized this very soon. The rulers of Israel, who were not at all religious, by the way, they were very secular to begin with. They were not people that you see today in government. And they saw the problem for what it was. All post-war codes of conduct, agreements internationally, okay, UN attempts to create a peaceful world after the devastation and the millions and millions who were killed in the Second World War, were emphasizing things like freedom and democracy. So here you've got Israel, and you've got the numbers of Jews are way outweighed by the numbers of people who were not Jewish, including Christian and Muslim people. So how do we, as the Israeli government, establish a free and equal democracy, when we want a Jewish state, when we want something that is a democracy for Jews only. So that became the big, big problem, and that is still the problem, and it's unsolvable. Because at that point, actually, of the establishment of the State of Israel, people were also saying, maybe we need a state where everybody could participate equally and there could be a democracy and Jewish practices and Jewish interests could be protected by a constitution, protected by law, as can Christian interests and practices, as can Muslim practices. That was considered, but the force of a Jewish-only state prevailed. I think very much influenced by the Holocaust experience, which was saying, no, we need a Jewish state will be a safe place for Jews. Let's see what happened. Is it a safe place? So squaring the circle's always been an issue. What they did first was that every decade from the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc., are characterized by a different influx of different Jewish groups from Latin America. Then there was an influx from Russia, the Soviet Jews. Then there was the first influx was from the Eastern Jews, who are called Mizrahim. They're people who lived across the Arab world, living side by side with their neighbors. And there were many things that started happening that were very precarious. And as a result of some not very savory things, like bomb blasts and that sort of thing, there was a trend towards Jews from Iran, Iraq, Syria, all over the Arab world, Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, etc., coming into the land of Israel. They weren't very well treated, by the way, but they were a bit dark, you know, for the Ashkenazi people who were very white-skinned and very European. And here were these other, they're called sort of very derogatory, sort of, oh, you're just Arab Jews. You're not really Jewish. So they have been not so treated so well. They haven't had the exact same rights, but that's what's happened. So, and then, of course, Jews in the 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s with the Soviet Jews. To try and square the circle, we need population here. And one of the attempts to get a higher population was to say to people with religious orientation, you know, who's steeped in Torah Judaism, come to Israel. You'll get supported. You'll get ability to live. We'll give you subsidies. We'll give you funds to live with, so you can go study Torah. So that was another group of people, and that group of people has grown very, very, very fast and a very big community. So the religious, especially the ultra-Orthodox, are a very big part of the population. Anyway, what the choices that were made? I've spoken a bit about the choice. The choice was made, instead of squaring the circle, by enabling all inhabitants of the area to work out a solution that is going to protect everybody. The choice was made to have this as a Jewish state which would be making laws that would make the Jews more wealthy, would protect them, would not be so accessible for other groupings and so on. This was the result. I don't want to go through this in detail because we don't have time, but this was the result. War. Everything in red that you see here indicates conflicts, indicates that there was not an original agreement between the local people and the people who had come to live in the area and who had many guns and the support of particularly, they actually had Soviet support as well as the UK, as well as the USA support in the very beginning. But they had support and won every war that was fought. Now, I'm not going to go through all these things. I mean, each one of which were horrendous and killed thousands and thousands of people. But you see that. Just keep looking at the red. Now this red is an indication, it's a visual sign that something's wrong. All societies have conflicts, but at this scale, right, at this scale, and over 75 years, no, not at that level. This tells us there's something going on here that is not too kosher, that is not okay. And, it goes right through, and I haven't even spoken about post-1998 when mowing the lawn in Gaza became a very regular thing in which thousands and thousands of people died and have continued dying to this day. Just an indication, I'm sorry, this is a little bit of an unclear slide, but you have the Ottoman Republic on the far left-hand side. And if you just go through what has happened is that the size of Palestine has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk until today it's even smaller than that because a lot of people, especially in those little dots there, have been moved out of their villages as a result of settlements, settlement attacks, where they're no longer able to live in those villages. So this is even outdated. So that's, from all those red points of conflict, and from a map that looks like that, and from this next slide, which was taken by myself in Hebron, when we went to Palestine, that something's wrong. That there is a net. Now, the people who live in those those stone houses on top, are Jews who've moved into that area in Hebron. The people who work below and have their little shop faces and their shop areas are people who've always been in Hebron. They're Palestinians. They've had to put up those nets to stop the Jews from throwing rocks at them and hurting them, so they can do business. And at the moment, you can see in that picture, those shop faces are closed because it's even been almost impossible to trade and to do your work as a as a person, tailor or glassmaker or whatever your profession is. So that's what we have. In Gaza, we saw the video, and I said, I don't want to speak about that because it makes me very upset and angry, and it's enough. Who do you think said this? This is a quote that has been made recently, and the quote is, "They are being killed there at levels that nobody's ever seen. No place in the world is as dangerous as the Gaza Strip. They are living in hell." Any idea? Donald Trump. That's what Donald Trump has said. He's kind of called the spade a little bit, but it's with a different agenda than we might have hoped. He's continued to provide the 1,000-pound bombs that has continued to flatten even those areas of Gaza and kill people without a problem. So the rallying cry today is they must go. In other words, it's so bad what Willie was saying about the soil. Forget it. I mean, that soil is poisoned by what goes into chemical bombs. And there's no way that that soil will ever produce for hundreds of years until it is restored. So, in fact, that Donald Trump statement is, unfortunately, it's got a really strong ring of truth about it. So, this is where we are now. They must go. They must go. Doesn't matter. We'll find them a place in Somaliland. We'll find them a place in Sudan. We'll find them a place in Egypt, in Syria and Jordan. People are not playing the game, though. They're not saying that this is okay. Those countries' authorities are saying, we don't want that. So this thing that would be squaring the circle for the Israelis, for the government, this final solution doesn't look like it's coming about. The people of Gaza have indicated that they'll not go anywhere. Now, when I say that, there's no doubt that there are people who will. That there are some people whose level of trauma, whose level of, you've had at least over 60,000 people killed, and you've had almost every single family has lost at least one person, if not entire families. So some people will go, but there's a very strong sentiment. This is our land. You can't just put us in Sudan, or the Transkei, for that matter. So that is what has happened. The second thing is that Hamas has not been eliminated. Why? Because this body, and we may or may not agree with what they do, and we may or may not agree with what happened on October the 7th. I'm devastated myself by that. But the thing is that this has been a structure that has organized resistance. And it's not because they're Jews. If they were Italians who were doing this to them, they would be organizing their resistance. If they were people from Iceland You know, it doesn't matter where you come from. We can't have you do this. We can't have you mow our lawn. We can't have you do this. So that's what people are saying, and it's very built in to the culture and to the thinking of the inhabitants of both the West Bank and Gaza. We actually just want peace, where we can live our lives in a free and democratic way. So Hamas has not been liberated, because as quickly as you can kill Hamas militants, they're recruiting 12-year-olds, because that's the anger, that's the trauma. People are just saying, this is how it is. You can't do this. We're going to fight. And, you know, that's not something that we, certainly from our sides, SAJP, and I'm sure from many of your churches' perspectives, we want a process where Palestinian voices will be heard, respected, negotiated with, where in the same way as in South Africa, there was an ultimate, after all the killing and all the destruction, an ultimate recognition. No, we have to sit down and talk. What happened at the talks is a different story, and things that didn't go right about the talks or whatever is another story. But the recognition was ultimately there. This is not the way. And that's something that I'm sure all of our religious bodies would like to arrive at that point. But what now? You know, we'd look like we're quite far away from that. Going back to our biblical texts, there's something that is not always fully understood in the world. Many people say, look, if you go to the Bible, you'll see that God gave us the right to the land. But what they don't, or they fail to recognize, I'm sorry I don't have the references, but it's throughout Deuteronomy. What they fail to recognize is that the divine instruction was conditional. And I would love to, at some point, I'll just go through all the references. You can be in the land if you behave according to my moral and ethical framework. It's not just God-given. It's not. It's conditional, and there are literally dozens of references. You can go into Deuteronomy, you can go into the Torah and have a look at all of this. So if you obey, and those laws, I mean, all the book of Deuteronomy is given to what are proper behaviors, and it includes things about how you treat the land. You know, you must have the seventh year must be the fallow. You must treat the land with respect. Give it a break. Don't try and produce beyond what it can do. And so on and so forth. And it's full of ethical teachings that teach us a lot about how to deal with each other and how to be in the world. And one of the things that it also teaches us, and I'm nearly finished, one of the things that it also teaches us is that there are many references in the Bible, in Exodus, where it specifies that in terms of other people, it firstly recognizes that they're other people. Exodus 3:7-9 actually is a quote from the divine that says, that is a land of many other people, and it lists Canaanites and Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, Jebusites. I'm sure you know you know this better than myself even. But what it goes on to do is say that you live equally with your neighbors, and specifies that the law that the divine has given to the Israelites, that law will be, that code of living, that code of behavior must be applied, not just to you, but to your neighbors. So the 10 Commandments, for example, must be applied. You do not kill. You treat your neighbor as yourself. This is the core of all our religions, as we know. And this says that there has to be equality, or that is the interpretation that certainly many Jews are recognizing, have recognized. Many haven't, and they prefer to look at Amalek, which don't exist, by the way, in 2025. So this issue is from our biblical sources. How does it instruct us to behave? And the question is, have the descendants of the Israelites obeyed divine will? That is the question we have to ask ourselves. That is the question that is being posed here today. And we need, I must say, just by way of finishing, we need to have the conversations. It's conversations. So that's where we need to go. So I would want to say, I know everybody here comes from different spaces. We, from the kind of Jewish perspective, acknowledged, would be very happy to have contact with your congregations, with your peer leaders. Very happy to present this and to debate and understand. Let's try understand from a Teasa perspective what doubts we have. We need to talk about these things. We need to look for an understanding of these things, and how to establish our balance. So I just want to say that, Reverend Moss and Dr. John, just to be able to contact the Teasa leadership and trigger conversations, and we'd be very happy to be part of those conversations in your own spaces. Thank you very much.